Everybody, welcome to another video. Now today it is the 9th of February, and today I'm just going to be doing an update about the Bahamut and the surrounding areas. I'm not really going to be talking about any other fronts, just because, again, the Bahamut front and its environs is the most important front at the moment, and it's really the only one that we're seeing substantial changes in. I know a lot of people have been wanting me to talk about Kremina and Kupiansk. For now, most of the information there is either just rumors, or a lot of the footage that I've seen being posted is old, unverified, so I can't really make any definitive statements about the front lines. I could just talk about the fact that Russia is generally launching probing assaults onto the Ukrainian lines, but I will do that in a different video. For now, I do want to talk about Bahamut because of the significance of the battle over there. So let's start out with the situation to the south of Bahamut, around the water canal, where we have the Russians advancing past the abandoned mine slash quarry that they took over a few weeks ago, and now they're actually advancing through some of these ponds that you see over here and through some of these landfills where a lot of the excess materials from these abandoned mines were stored. So they're taking it over now, the Wagner group, and they are approaching the 0504 road from another direction. They already have control, basically physically, but 100% fire control over the road in one area, and now they're going to reach that road on another area, because I'm sure the road's still being used. If you zoom out a little bit, I'm sure that the T0504 road is still being utilized by the Ukrainians to maybe reach Chasiv Yar or maybe reach Konstantinivka. So if the Russians could cut off at some other direction, it'll make it even more difficult for the Ukrainians to resupply their forces in the Donbass. So now we're seeing the Wagner group approach the road from this general direction. And in the process, they have been able to take over the higher elevated areas. So where you see this deciduous forest and you see this landfill and this pond and all of that, that's about, I don't know, 180 meters above sea level versus Stopochki, which is at around maybe 120 meters above sea level, just as a general estimate. So you do see how there is a difference in the elevation. Now, given the fact, it makes it much more difficult to develop Stopochki, especially given the fact that it is a very rural town. I think it has a population of 89, and obviously now it has a population of 0. But there aren't that many defensive fortifications in this area. There aren't that many houses that you can hide in if you're a soldier. So defending it is very difficult. And so we're receiving reports of some Ukrainian units and some Ukrainian men in this area retreating from their positions in Stopochki towards the town of Chasiv Yar, where we have a lot of extensive fortifications being built by the Ukrainians at the moment in preparation for an impending Russian assault on it once Bahamut is taken. Now, in the area of Chasiv Yar, we've actually seen some troop rotations. We've seen the 30th Brigade, which used to be stationed in Chasiv Yar, being moved into Paraskoviivka. And something that we heard about the 30th Mechanized Brigade from Ukrainian telegram sources is that the unit was not given proper ammunition. They were not given any sort of artillery cover when they were sent to the front line, which did make it more difficult for them to mount a proper defensive operation. So this is not just an issue that's plaguing the 30th Mechanized Brigade, but it is something that's now really becoming an issue for many units on the front line for Ukraine. And as more and more of these units are sent to the front line, it is making it more difficult to really man the rear and build defensive fortifications. Although that's still going on, the Wagner group is sort of anticipating this buildup in Chasiv Yar. And so they're preemptively gaining ground on the southern flanks so they can get control of high ground, which is really on par with the high ground on Chasiv Yar. Because if you look at the areas that the Wagner group is now taking, this area that I'm circling right now, it is basically level with the Ukrainian high ground at Chasiv Yar and in the forests around it. So it will give the Wagner group a staging ground to cross the road and then begin attacking the forest. Now, once they clear the forest out, they will be able to penetrate the middle of the city, and they will be able to attack some of the industrial facilities and cut off Chasiv Yar from two different directions. So the groupings on one side will be isolated from the other, and that could sort of go in tandem with assaults from the east and from the north, depending on how the situation unfolds. But all in all, it's really not looking good in this specific direction for Ukraine, especially as most of the resources are really now being allotted to the main front line around the city of Bahamut, but also around the Paraskoviivka direction. And so you don't have that many men to spare for the situation to the west of the water canal. But that's one of the most important parts of the front line that is being ignored by many people. They just hear about Bahamut and they're not looking at the bigger picture. The bigger picture is that the water canal would be the next defensive line for Ukraine if Bahamut were to fall, which it's looking like it will. And so because the water canal in general is like about 200 meters above sea level, it is important for the Ukrainians to hold on to it. But if the Wagner Group is able to preemptively take over the land, the open fields to the west of the water canal, then it will be impossible to actually hold on to them and make them a suitable defensive line. Then you would have to look at the situation in Kramatorsk and Slavyansk. But for now, we're focusing on Bakhmut. So in the Bakhmut area, we have the Russians trying to advance towards these Ukrainian fortifications. Here you have some Ukrainian dachas, so it's more rural in nature. And so you do have some open fields, you do have some agricultural enterprises, you do have some bush lines, orchards in this area. The Ukrainians have turned this agricultural enterprise into a defensive fortification, trenches, and they're using the mountains to their advantage to hide and then fire upon Russian positions as the Russians are advancing. There's also some clashes going on in this forested area. Once the Wagner Group is able to clear it out, and they will be able to assault the Ukrainian fortifications from this direction as they're also assaulting it from the south. And by taking these fortifications, the Wagner Group will have a stronghold on the western side of Bakhmut, which will allow them to penetrate the city from a totally different direction. While most of the Ukrainian forces are really focused right now on preventing a breakthrough to the east, imagine what will happen if the Russians are able to just bypass that and take over fortifications to the west and then begin enveloping it from another side. That will just stretch out the Ukrainians even more than is already occurring, and then it will also make it difficult for the Ukrainians in Ivanivske because they will be enveloped from three sides. In this direction, in the eastern part of Bahamut, we haven't really seen any changes. The Ukrainians have been able to effectively prevent Russian advances deeper into the Zabakhmutka district or into the main road leading into western Bakhmut or into the Miaskombinat district for now, using some of their reconnaissance and sabotage units and using some of their last remaining artillery units in this area, like the 92nd Brigade. I read that they were operating in this area now, utilizing some of their artillery, some of it being shipped from the west, and then also 59th Brigade was mentioned, although I did believe that they were in Zaporozhye. Maybe some of their battalions were transferred to Bakhmut in the past few days to deal with the worsening situation. Then in the northern district, I really don't have any updates. The Ukrainians have been able to prevent any gains from going on in the past 24 hours, to my knowledge. Then in Paraskoviivka, situation is pretty interesting. The Russians are not really trying to advance onto the town head-on, which is understandable because a lot of the main Ukrainian defense nodes are within the town, and there are some industrial factories that have large stockpiles of weapons. And so it is difficult to penetrate deep into the center of the town. Same thing with Krasnohora. They can't even really take it right now, the Russians, because of the effective Ukrainian resistance. So they've just tried to flank it entirely. And because the Ukrainians in the defensive line over here, that was really their only line of defense. And once they got overwhelmed and they had to retreat, the Russians were able to find a weak point and they were able to exploit it. And this is the result. They have been able to push through these open fields. They were able to take over the higher grounds, the ridges, and they were also able to take this valley that I'm drawing over right now. They were able to take this valley, and they've basically reached the E40 highway. There's disagreement as to whether they are physically there yet, or as whether they just have fire control or It's a gray zone either way. It's not like the Ukrainians are using it anymore, which means that Paraskoviivka, how's it being supplied at the moment? Really, the only way that it can be supplied is through these small roads. Who knows if they're even that well paved, if they can carry heavy equipment or anything. But these are really the only ways that the town could be supplied. And remember, this is really a large grouping of Ukrainians in this area, because a lot of the Ukrainian units that had to retreat from Soledar, they moved to this area and they tried to reorganize around here. Some reorganized to the north, so now they're safe because they retreated in time. But the ones in Paraskoviivka, they are in a major threat of being encircled. So they'll either try to hold the line for as long as possible, or they'll try to retreat to Berkivka before it is too late. And then maybe they'll try to build a new line around the E40 highway. But at the same time, we're seeing preliminary reports of the Russian forces that were able to achieve this breakthrough, beginning to attack Zolizhnyansk. We already see changes to the map of Russia expanding their zone of control since my video yesterday. We're also seeing reports that they're going to try to take Orikovo, Vasilivka. This would be a part of their strategy of just bypassing the second line of defense that Ukraine is trying to plan out right now, which is around the water canal. Because if they are able to take Orikovo, Vasilivka, they will be able to reach the water canal from another area, and then they will be able to use this to flank the entirety of the Ukrainian grouping around Bahamut that would in theory be sent to the water canal if they had to retreat from the city eventually. And so that's the threat of this new Russian breakthrough. There's also the threat that they will continue advancing past this valley, take this ridge that I'm zooming in on, then advance past another valley, this one over here, and then take this ridge over here. And we'll just continue doing that because there aren't that many Ukrainian defensive fortifications in this general area in between these two roads. And so you could see Russia exploit that to their advantage to reach Raya-Alexandrivka, which is a key road junction where the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade is stationed. And at the same time, we're seeing Russian assaults resume on Fedorivka. They had paused for a few days ever since the Russians had been able to take Sakhoy, Vansety, and Nikolaevka. But now we're seeing a renewed assault on the Fedorivka, so we'll see what happens over there. Lastly, the situation in Spirony has now been clarified. So the Russians have control of the gas compressor station, and they were able to advance along this road towards, I don't know what this is. Maybe it's like some minor road, or maybe it's just like a branch off of Spirony, like just some minor hamlet in the area. But either way, this node over here, which I'm sure was a Ukrainian node of defense because it was so difficult to take over, was taken over by the Russians. And so now the front line is sort of centered around the center of Spirony, or just a bit more to the east of Spirony, while Ukraine still controls the warehouses and they still control the pond and the main road that encompasses the north and the south of Spirony. But we are seeing undoubtedly more pressure being applied onto Spirony for reasons that I've mentioned previously, just because it is a linchpin of the Ukrainian defense over here. Once it's taken, Ivano-Darivka could be attacked, and then the fortifications are there, and there isn't really much in between the Russians and Seversk in that case. But there is some interesting news of Ukraine actually making localized counterattacks in the area north of Spirony. So I've had to adjust my map to show that the Ukrainians actually were able to take over some open fields to the east of Verkhnokamianske and to the north of Spirony. This was probably to strengthen their flanks and to just create more of a buffer in between the Russian line and the Ukrainian defensive line. So again, this is more so just positional fighting, and these fields aren't that important, but it does show that Ukraine does still have the capability to defend in this specific area, and that, you know, there's some emphasis being put on preventing a Russian breakthrough towards Seversk in this area. But that is all for today. So thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys later. Goodbye.